1 million copies. That's how many copies The Legend of Zelda sold on its very first day of release in Japan in 1986. A number that would be impressive even today, but was absolutely unprecedented for a video game nearly 40 years ago. But here's the twist. Almost nobody outside Japan knew that statistic for years, because the game didn't reach North American shores until 18 months later, packaged in the iconic gold cartridge that would become gaming's most recognizable color. The original Legend of Zelda wasn't just a game, it was a revolution wrapped in 128 kilobytes of data, and its creation story is filled with fascinating details that even longtime fans might not know. From the real-life American novelist who inspired Princess Zelda's name, to the copyright issue that almost gave the game a completely different theme song, these 10 retro facts reveal how close this legendary game came to being something entirely different. Fact number 1. The Legend of Zelda was almost called adventure. When Shigeru Miyamoto began developing the game, he drew direct inspiration from adventure on the Atari 2600, one of the first graphical adventure games that allowed players to explore a world with multiple paths and hidden secrets. According to development documents, the project was actually titled Adventure at one point during early production. Miyamoto wanted to capture that same sense of discovery and exploration that made the Atari game compelling, but expand it dramatically with better graphics, more complex dungeons, and richer gameplay. The team eventually settled on the Hyrule Fantasy: The Legend of Zelda as the full official title, with Hyrule Fantasy intended to be the series name and The Legend of Zelda serving as the subtitle for this first installment. That naming convention didn't stick. Subsequent games dropped Hyrule Fantasy entirely, but it reveals how Nintendo initially envisioned branding the franchise. The connection to Atari's adventure wasn't just conceptual either. Both games featured top-down exploration, hidden rooms accessed through specific actions, and puzzle solving that rewarded player experimentation. The Legend of Zelda took those foundational ideas and elevated them to a scale impossible on Atari hardware, creating something that would define adventure gaming for generations. Fact number 2. Princess Zelda was named after Zelda Fitzgerald, the wife of famous novelist F. Scott Fitzgerald. Shigeru Miyamoto explained in interviews that when searching for a name for the princess, he learned about Zelda Fitzgerald and was immediately captivated. He described her as a famous and beautiful woman from all accounts, noting that he liked the sound of her name and took the liberty of using her name for the very first Zelda title. This connection to American literature came from Miyamoto's desire to create a name that sounded elegant and memorable. Zelda Fitzgerald was known in the 1920s as an artist, writer, and personality who helped establish the image of the liberated flapper woman during the Roaring Twenties. Her life was dramatic, creative, and ultimately tragic, making her an enduring cultural figure. Miyamoto appreciated both the historical significance and the phonetic quality of the name, believing it perfectly suited a princess in a fantasy kingdom. The name later came full circle when actor Robin Williams, a massive Zelda fan, named his daughter Zelda after the princess. His daughter Zelda Williams has become a celebrity in her own right and has spoken publicly about how Majora's Mask is her favorite entry in the series. This creates a fascinating chain. A real American woman inspired a fictional princess, who then inspired the name of another real person who grew up loving the games. Fact number 3. The iconic overworld theme was composed in a single day as an emergency replacement. Composer Koji Kondo had originally planned to use Maurice Ravel's Bolero as the main theme for The Legend of Zelda. Kondo believed the piece perfectly matched the game's pacing and mood. Under Japanese copyright law at the time, musical compositions entered the public domain 50 years after the composer's death, which would have made Ravel's work available for use. However, in November 1985, late in the game's development cycle, Kondo discovered a critical problem. Ravel had died in 1937, meaning only 47 years and 11 months had passed. The copyright wouldn't expire for another month. With the game's release date approaching and no time to wait, Kondo was forced to compose an entirely new theme. According to interviews, he wrote the now legendary Overworld melody that players instantly recognize, one of gaming's most iconic musical themes, in just one day. This desperate last-minute composition became the defining sound of the entire franchise, appearing in nearly every subsequent Zelda title with various arrangements. The irony is staggering. What could have been a temporary solution to a copyright crisis instead became one of the most recognizable pieces of music in video game history. Imagine an alternate timeline where Zelda's theme is Bolero instead of Kondo's masterpiece. The entire emotional resonance of the franchise would be completely different. Fact number 4. The game featured a hidden microphone mechanic that only worked in Japan. In the Japanese Famicom version of The Legend of Zelda, players encountered an enemy called Pole's Voice, a ghost-like creature with large rabbit ears. The instruction manual for both Japanese and international versions described Pole's Voice as hating loud noises, but this hint caused massive confusion for Western players. The manual seemed to suggest using the recorder flute item, but that didn't work very well. The secret was that the Japanese Famicom controller included a built-in microphone on the second controller.
Players could actually shout or blow into this microphone to damage and instantly defeat Paul's Voice enemies. This made them trivially easy to kill in Japan, but frustratingly resilient everywhere else. When Nintendo released the game on the NES in North America and Europe, the controllers lacked this microphone feature entirely. The developers didn't modify the enemy's behavior or the manual's description for international releases, leaving Western players to figure out alternative strategies, typically using arrows, which required more resources and effort. This regional difference exemplifies how hardware variations between the Famicom and NES created divergent player experiences. Japanese audiences had unique gameplay mechanics that were technically impossible for international players, creating two subtly different versions of the same game. Fact number 5. The Legend of Zelda was the first home console game to include battery-backed save functionality. Before this innovation, players either had to complete games in single sessions or rely on password systems, lengthy codes written down on paper and re-entered to resume progress. The Legend of Zelda changed everything by incorporating a battery and RAM chip inside the cartridge itself, allowing players to save directly to the cart. This was revolutionary for 1986 technology and essential for a game as large and complex as Zelda. Without the ability to save progress, completing the game would have required marathon sessions lasting many hours, which simply wasn't practical for most players. The save system was elegantly implemented. Players pressed up and select simultaneously on the inventory screen to save their progress at any time. Nintendo's decision to include this expensive technology demonstrated their confidence in the game's potential. Battery-backed cartridges cost significantly more to manufacture than standard carts, but Nintendo bet that players would pay premium prices for a premium experience. They were right. The game's success validated the investment, and battery saves became standard for complex games throughout the NES and SNES eras. This single technical innovation enabled longer, more ambitious narratives in console gaming. Without it, the medium might have remained focused on score-based arcade experiences for years longer. Fact number 6. All 9 dungeon maps in The Legend of Zelda can be arranged to form a perfect rectangular grid. This isn't just a coincidence or a fan theory. It's a deliberate design decision made to conserve precious cartridge space. According to development documentation, the dungeons were specifically designed to fit together like puzzle pieces, allowing Nintendo's programmers to optimize how the data was stored. By ensuring all dungeons used the same underlying grid structure, the game could reuse certain code and structural elements rather than creating unique frameworks for each dungeon. This kind of aggressive optimization was essential for working within the constraints of 1986 hardware. The entire game had to fit on a 128 kilobyte cartridge, which is smaller than most email attachments today. Every byte mattered. Designers had to be incredibly creative about reusing assets, compressing data, and finding efficiencies wherever possible. The dungeon grid system exemplifies this brilliant constraint-driven design. Players navigating through dungeons would never notice that each labyrinth was designed to fit into a standardized tile space, but that invisible structure allowed Nintendo to pack 9 substantial dungeons into an impossibly small storage footprint. Modern games measure sizes in gigabytes, making dozens or hundreds of gigabytes routine. The original Zelda accomplished more with 128 kilobytes than many modern indie games manage with millions of times more space. Fact number 7. Rupees in The Legend of Zelda were directly copied from another Nintendo game. The sprite used for rupees, Hyrule's currency, was taken straight from Clu Clu Land, an earlier Nintendo arcade game released in 1984. In Clu Clu Land, the same sprite represented gold ingots that players collected for points. Nintendo simply repurposed the existing asset for Zelda, giving it a new name and context, but keeping the identical visual design. This wasn't laziness, it was smart resource management during an era when creating even simple sprites required significant time and effort. Development teams were small, deadlines were tight, and reusing proven assets from previous games made perfect sense. Interestingly, another Clu Clu Land connection appears in The Legend of Zelda's enemy roster. According to the Japanese manual, the boss Digdogger is actually a giant Unira, the sea urchin-like enemies from Clu Clu Lived. This establishes a peculiar canonical link between the two games' universes, suggesting they share some biological or dimensional connection. These kinds of asset reuse and cross-game references were common during the 8-bit era. Development teams often borrowed liberally from their previous projects, creating weird, interconnected networks where characters and items from one Nintendo game would appear in completely different contexts in another Nintendo game. For modern players, discovering these connections creates a fun treasure hunt through Nintendo's early catalog, finding where familiar sprites originated before appearing in more famous titles. Fact number 8. The Legend of Zelda sold over 1 million copies in its first 24 hours in Japan. When the game launched on February 21, 1986 as the debut title for the Famicom Disk System, demand was astronomical. Lines formed at stores across Japan, the game sold out immediately. By the end of launch day, over 1 million copies had been purchased, a staggering figure that demonstrated just how much anticipation surrounded Miyamoto's new project. This success was partially due to the Famicom Disk System's novelty. Nintendo marketed the peripheral heavily, and bundling high-profile launch titles like The Legend of Zelda and a reissue of Super Mario Bros. Created irresistible value propositions for early adopters.
The disk system itself offered advantages over cartridges: more storage space, rewritable media, and enhanced audio through an extra sound channel. The Legend of Zelda took full advantage of these capabilities, delivering richer music than NES cartridges could reproduce. The game ultimately sold 1.69 million copies on the Famicom Disk System before receiving a cartridge re-release in Japan in 1994. Western audiences had to wait 18 months after the Japanese launch. The game didn't arrive in North America until August 22, 1987, and Europe until November 27, 1987. By then, word of mouth from imported copies and gaming magazines had built enormous hype. When the gold cartridge finally hit shelves, it became the first NES game to sell over 1 million copies in the United States during 1987, then surpassed 2 million by 1988. The game's commercial dominance established Zelda as one of Nintendo's flagship franchises alongside Mario. Fact number 9. The gold cartridge was more common than gray cartridges, but it remains gaming's most iconic packaging choice. The Legend of Zelda and its sequel, Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link, were released in distinctive gold-colored cartridges that immediately stood out on store shelves surrounded by standard gray NES games. This wasn't just aesthetic flair, it was brilliant marketing that communicated premium quality before players even started the game. Interestingly, the gold version is actually more common than gray cartridges of The Legend of Zelda. A standard gray cartridge edition was released later as part of Nintendo's Classic Series reissue line in 1992. But those gray carts are rarer than the original gold versions because they were produced in smaller quantities. Despite being more common, the gold cartridge commands higher prices and nostalgia among collectors because it represents the original authentic experience. Few other NES games received special colored cartridges. The Gold Nintendo World Championships 1990 competition cart is one of the rarest video games in existence, with individual units selling for tens of thousands of dollars. Various limited edition gold carts exist, but The Legend of Zelda's remains the most recognizable. For an entire generation of gamers, seeing that gold cartridge meant adventure, mystery, and epic quests awaited. The color became synonymous with quality and ambition in game design. Even today, when Nintendo releases special editions or anniversary products, they frequently incorporate gold elements as direct callbacks to that original packaging choice that defined Zelda's brand identity. Fact number 10. Miyamoto and his team developed The Legend of Zelda and Super Mario Bros. Simultaneously for 5 to 7 months. According to Shigeru Miyamoto in a 1994 interview featured in the liner notes of The Legend of Zelda Sound and Drama CD,
Nintendo's team started working on Zelda as a launch title for the Famicom Disk System in 1984. Shortly before that, they began development on Super Mario Bros., leading to a period where both revolutionary games were being created concurrently. This overlap lasted approximately 5 to 7 months and made the design stage of development incredibly busy. The simultaneous development wasn't accidental, it was strategic. Miyamoto explained that the team deliberately tried to separate their ideas, determining which concepts were Mario ideas and which were Zelda ideas. Super Mario Bros. Was designed to be linear, where action occurred in strict sequence with clear progression from left to right. Zelda was built to be the opposite, non-linear, forcing players to think about what they should do next rather than simply moving forward. This philosophical distinction created two franchises that would define different genres of gaming. The cross-pollination between projects was inevitable and beneficial. Lessons learned while implementing Super Mario Bros.' tight controls informed how Link should move. Solutions discovered while designing Zelda's exploration encouraged Mario's secret areas and hidden paths. Both games revolutionized their respective genres in 1985 and 1986, establishing Nintendo as the premier developer of console games. The fact that such a small team created both masterpieces simultaneously is remarkable. Modern AAA games require hundreds of developers working for years on single projects. Miyamoto's team accomplished more with fewer resources by sharing knowledge and maintaining a unified creative vision across multiple groundbreaking titles. These 10 facts reveal how The Legend of Zelda emerged from a perfect storm of creative vision, technical innovation, and strategic decision-making. The game almost had a different name, borrowed assets from previous Nintendo titles, included regional hardware features that international players never experienced, and pioneered save technology that changed gaming forever. Its development overlapped with Super Mario Bros., its theme song was composed in a day, and its princess was named after an American author's wife. The gold cartridge became iconic despite being more common than gray versions, and it sold 1 million copies on day one in Japan before conquering the world 18 months later. What makes these facts fascinating isn't just their trivia value, it's how they illustrate the precarious nature of game development. The Legend of Zelda could have been dramatically different if any single decision had changed. If copyright law was slightly different, players would hum Bolero instead of Kondo's theme. If Nintendo hadn't invested in expensive battery technology, the game might have used passwords or been split into shorter, disconnected episodes. If Miyamoto had insisted on the first-person perspective he originally proposed, the entire franchise would have evolved along a completely different trajectory. If the team hadn't balanced simultaneous Mario and Zelda development, both games might have suffered from divided attention. Instead, everything aligned. Budget constraints bred creative solutions like reusing sprites and optimizing dungeon layouts. Hardware capabilities enabled new features like battery saves and added sound channels. Marketing decisions like gold cartridges created instant brand recognition. Cultural inspiration from American literature to Japanese childhood exploration experiences created a fantasy world that resonated globally across different audiences. The development team's willingness to iterate and change course, abandoning Bolero, separating Mario and Zelda philosophies, deciding which features belong to which franchise, demonstrated flexibility that turned good ideas into legendary execution. The original Legend of Zelda stands as gaming's most influential adventure title nearly 40 years after release. Players still return to its 8-bit dungeons and hidden caves, still discover new secrets through experimentation, still feel that rush of exploration that Miyamoto intended to capture from his childhood adventures. The retro facts behind its creation don't diminish the magic, they enhance it by revealing how close this masterpiece came to never existing in the form players know and love. 1 million people bought it on day one in Japan, trusting that the gold cartridge contained something special. They were right, and decades later, knowing these 10 facts makes that golden treasure even more precious.